The tanner set the bowl of salt broth on his stoop and told the widow she was not ugly, and 6 weeks later 9 matriarchs stood on the balconies of a private moon and watched him drop the tungsten spike into their queen's jaw. She was 7 feet of tusk and cracked green hide when she dragged herself to his door at dusk, and she expected the shutter to slam. Her clan had already marked her ifpal, which in her mother tongue meant unfit to breed, unfit to fight, unfit to live. The old human looked her up and down like she was a hide he was pricing, and he said 6 words that would set an empire on fire. Later, in a throne pit lined with the skulls of exiled widows, he would spit blood on the stone and ask for a real cup of coffee. But that came later. The air on Galtra's 3rd moon tasted of tannin, cold copper, and burnt hair, and 6 weeks before any of that, Sam Whittle was scraping the last light out of a hide with the flat of a curved knife. He worked the beam the way his father had shown him. Left hand on the loop, right hand on the fleshing knife, and the wrist just so the edge lifted the fat without cutting the grain. The hide was from a 6-legged brute the rim-worlders called a clath, and it was thick as a saddle. He had already stripped 4 that day. His shoulders were long past sore. His shoulders had been long past sore since he was 22. He heard her before he saw her. A wet, uneven step in the tannin mud outside. He did not lift his head, he did not stop scraping. He counted the steps between the gate and his stoop the way another man might count coins. 7 strides. She dragged the 8th. She was hurt. He set the knife on the beam and wiped his hands on the leather apron, and only then did he turn. She filled his doorway, Vorak plainly. The tusks curled up past her cheekbones like ivory hooks, and the cracked green hide on her forearms was the color of old copper roofing. She was thin for her people, half-starved. There was a wound above her hip that had been closed with wire and left to weep. Someone had wanted her to bleed in public. She did not speak. She did not move. He looked her up and down, slowly, the way he looked at a hide before he paid for it. Then he nodded once, as though he had reached a price. "You are not ugly, ma'am," he said. "You are tired." Her mouth opened. The translator at her ear clicked and hummed and produced no sound, because she had produced no sound. He turned back to the beam without waiting for one, and he took a wooden bowl from the shelf, and he ladled it half full from the black pot on the stove, and he set it on the flat of the stoop between them. "Salt broth," he said. "Don't scald yourself." Then he went back to his hide, and he began scraping again, as if 7 feet of exiled Vorak on his threshold was just weather. Her true name was a chest rumble of glottals the translator flattened badly to Skarn. She was Skarnavesh of Clan Sunval, once a bond widow of the war mother Vharga Sun, and by every law that had been read to her from the day she could bite meat, she should already be dead. Her husband had been eaten in the trench of Rune. She had come back on the same shuttle as his bones, and Vaiga had listened to her report and had walked around her 3 times in the throne hall, sniffing, judging, and had touched the crooked place at Skarn's jaw where a tusker's hoof had shattered it in her 16th year. And Vaiga had said the word Ugval out loud in front of the whole clan, which meant the door was not hers anymore, which meant no roof was hers anymore, which meant her name was already being scratched off the stones. She had walked out. She had not eaten in 5 days. She had crossed a mud flat with a wire in her hip because a hunt scout from her own clan had put it there, laughing, as a farewell gift. She had come to the human's shack because she had heard from a trader that the old man on the rim gave you water even if you smelled like carrion. She had not expected broth. She had not expected to be told she was not ugly. She had not expected to be told she was tired. She sat down on the stoop because her knees would not hold her anymore, and she picked up the bowl and she drank. Whittle did not watch her drink. He kept his back to the door and he scraped the hide, and after a while he said, without turning, "The wire in your hip is going to rot the flesh around it by tomorrow. When you finish that, come inside and I'll pull it. I've got a tannin bath that'll clean it and a needle that'll hold it shut." She rumbled something the translator did not catch. He nodded anyway. Also, he said, you might want to know, there's people coming for you tonight, 6 of them. They set up a sight nest on the ridge about an hour before you crested the rise. I could see the sun off the scope glass from my beam. The bull paused halfway to her mouth. The salt broth trembled. You knew, she said. First words, low and slow. I knew, he said. I've been listening to them cough for an hour. Why did you not lock the door? He set the knife down again. He turned. In the lamplight, his hair was iron gray and long enough to be tied at the back of his neck. His eyes were the color of wet slate. He was, she realized suddenly, only tall for a human, 6 feet at the shoulder maybe, 59 years old. His hands were the size of shovels. Because if I locked the door, he said, then in the morning I'd have to explain to my beam why I let a tired woman die on my stoop for being tired. I don't feel like explaining that. Not to my beam, not to anybody. Skarn set the bull down very carefully. They will kill you, she said. The old human smiled with only one side of his mouth. He picked up the knife. They can try. They came at moonrise. Skarn heard them before she saw them, because she knew the sound of Vorak boots on packed tannin mud, and she knew the whisper hiss of an energy lance being armed low. There were 6 shadows on the ridge, and they slid down into the gully behind the shack, in the disciplined half-crouch that meant they had trained together. She recognized the shoulder tattoo of the lead blade before she saw the face. Threshkar, a cousin. He had helped shatter her jaw when she was 16. He had been laughing then too. Whittle had put her in the drying shed with a bucket and a knife he called an awl. He had told her not to come out no matter what she heard. He said this the way he might have told a dog to stay in the truck. Then he walked out into the yard with the tanner's beam over his shoulder. The beam was a shaft of black wood as thick as a man's thigh. It was oiled with something that smelled of fish. It was longer than he was tall. She saw him set it in the tannin mud beside the fleshing post, and she saw him roll his shoulders once, and she saw the moliness fall off him like a coat. She had thought he was tired. She had thought he was old. She had thought, watching him scrape a hide, that this was a man who had spent his whole life doing one useless thing. That was the first lie of the night. Threshkar came into the yard first, because he was the biggest and it was his hunt. He was cocky. He held the energy lance across his chest instead of forward. He grinned at Whittle. He said the word he thought would end it. Old man, he said. Whittle did not answer. Whittle stepped in with the beam. The first swing did not come at Threshkar's head. It came at his knee. Varak plate is thick at the chest and thin at the joints. Whittle's beam took the outside of the knee plate at the exact seam where the greave met the thigh cap, and it did not shatter the armor because the beam was not fast enough for that. It just folded the knee. Threshkar went down with a sound Skarn had never heard from a Varak male before. It was a bark, high and short, the sound a boy makes when he first understands he is going to fall from a tree. Whittle did not stop. The butt of the beam came around and caught Threshkar under the jaw. The tusks cracked, the head snapped. Whittle stepped through him and left him in the mud. The second blade was already through the gate. Whittle did not fight him with the beam. Whittle pulled the fleshing knife from his apron and stepped inside the lance tip. The lance tip was long. The fleshing knife was short. Whittle turned his shoulder into the man's chest, put his weight through his boots, and drove the knife up under the throat plate. He did not saw. He pushed. Then he stepped back, and the man fell around him. 2 down, 4 seconds. The remaining 4 came in a rush, because they had seen the second, and they had decided all at once that this was not what they were told it was. They came in a wedge, and they lit their shimmer shields. Whittle had backed toward the drying shed door. He was breathing through his nose. The beam was over his shoulder again. Skarn saw one of them raise the lance and fire. She saw the bolt of white-blue plasma leave the muzzle. She saw the old human do nothing about it. Then she heard something whip out of the yard post very fast, and the bolt burst 2 meters short of Whittle in a scatter of harmless light. The tanner had strung a wire across the yard at chest height. The wire was dark. It ran between 2 iron posts. It had a magnet plate on it. The shimmer shield of the lead blade, keyed to disperse energy, had also grounded him to the plate. It was a piece of cheap tannery hardware. It cost him nothing. It ended the shield. Then Whittle threw the spike. He kept the spikes in a leather roll on his belt. Later she would learn he cast them himself in the curing oven. Tungsten cores in a wax mold, 12 inches long, ground to a point, weighted at the base. Tungsten was heavy. Tungsten was slow. Tungsten did not care about a shimmer shield tuned to slap away plasma, because tungsten was not plasma. It was rock. It was earth. It went where he threw it. He threw the first one at the throat of the lead blade, and the throat of the lead blade came apart. He threw the second one at the eye plate of the second, and the second was blind before he hit the ground. The third blade broke ranks and ran at him with a shock blade, because a shock blade did not need a shield to work. Whittle set the beam. He watched the man come. He waited until the shock blade was inside the length of the beam, and he did not swing the beam. He rammed with it, two-handed, from the hip, like a man driving a pole into a riverbank. The butt of the beam took the third blade in the sternum, and Skan heard the ribs go from 12 meters away. The last one, the sixth, tried to back out. Skan watched from the shed door because she could not stay in the shed anymore. She watched the sixth Vahorak turn to run for the gate, and she watched Whittle bend down and pick up Threshkar's fallen energy lens from the mud, and she watched him check the load with a thumb, as though he had held one before, many times, and she watched him put a bolt neatly into the back of the sixth blade's knee and drop him. Then she watched Whittle walk over to the last one and kneel beside him and lift the man's head by the tusk braid and speak into his ear very quietly in Vahorak. She did not know Whittle spoke Vahorak. The last blade answered him in a shaking whisper. Whittle nodded. He asked something else. The last blade answered again. Then Whittle stood up, and he put the point of the fleshing knife under the last blade's chin, and he pushed once, and he wiped the knife on the leather apron, and he came back to the door of the shed. He was not out of breath, he was not smiling. His shirt was black at the ribs where a shock blade had glanced him, and he was bleeding steadily onto his boots, and he did not seem to have noticed. "You can come out now," he said. Skan came out. The tannin yard was full of dead cousins. The moons were up. The gatepost was still smoking where a bolt had hit it. The magnet wire was ringing very softly in the wind. Whittle bent down and unclipped his own belt roll and slid the two spikes he had thrown back into their slots. Then he began, with the same patience he had used on the hide, to strip the shimmer belts and the lancels and the shock blades from the dead. He piled them by the drying shed. He did not hurry. "Do not leave them like this," Skan said. Her voice was flat. "Their clan will come. They will find them, and they will read the bodies, and they will know." "Their clan," said Whittle, without looking up, "is who sent them. Then Vigarga will come herself." "Good," said Whittle. He unhooked Threshkar's throat plate and tossed it onto the pile. "Save me the walk." Skan sat down on the stoop because her knees had gone again. He came over after a while and looked at her. "You still got that wire in your hip?" he said. She nodded. "Come inside," he said. "I'll pull it." Inside the shack, she learned 3 things. She learned that the old human had a bathtub, which was a rare thing on the rim, and that he heated it with a coil that ran off the tannery boiler, and that the water inside was tannin brown but hot enough to steam. He put her in it. He did not look at her while he did. He gave her a wooden brush that was too small for her hands and told her to scrub, and he went into the front room to boil his needles. She learned that he had a shelf of books, and every book on the shelf was about hides, about tanning, about the chemistry of leather, about the 6 species of oak whose bark made the best liquor for the pit, about the physics of collagen. She could not read any of them, but she could see they were all worn to fuzz at the corners, and she understood that this was a man who had done one thing for a very long time and had loved it enough to read about it after work. And she learned that he had a fleshing knife, and the fleshing knife had a wooden handle, and the wooden handle had scratches on the underside. She saw the scratches when he set the knife on the table beside the boiling needles. They were telemarks, small, careful. Cut with the point of a needle, 4 vertical, 1 across, 4 vertical, 1 across, over and over. She could count. There were 32. She said nothing about them. Not yet, not until she understood what a tanner was counting. He pulled the wire out of her hip with a pair of blackened pliers and a hand that did not shake, and he flushed the wound with tannin water and then with something that smelled sharply of alcohol, and he stitched her closed with a leather needle and a length of gut. He did this in silence. She watched his face while he worked. He did not wince when she did. When he was done, he tied off the gut and cut it clean and dropped the needle in a jar and stood up and washed his hands in the basin. "You'll live," he said. "Sleep in the loft. Nobody comes up the ladder in this house who I don't want up the ladder." She looked at him. He was drying his hands on a rag. His own shirt was still black at the ribs. "You have not asked," she said. "Asked what?" "Why they came for me." He hung the rag on the peg. He turned. He looked at her the way he had looked at her on the stoop, the way you look at a hide when you are pricing it. "You're an exile with a wire in your hip and no clan braid on your shoulder," he said. "I don't need to ask. I don't need the story. If you want to tell me the story sometime, you tell me. If you don't, don't. Either way, I've got 14 hides to finish this week." He went to bed. She lay in the loft and stared at the underside of the beams. She had walked into this shack expecting to die on the stoop. She had ended the night in a stranger's tub with clean water in her hair and a stranger's stitches in her flank. She thought about the tally under his knife. She slept. In the morning he taught her the beam. He did not call it teaching. He came out at dawn with a hide over his shoulder and dropped it on the fleshing post and said, "Try." He watched her hold the knife wrong for a minute, and then he came over and moved her hands. His fingers were the size of tool handles. His grip was not gentle, but it was correct. "Loop here," he said. "Wrist here. Angle down. You cut the fat, not the grain. You feel the pop when the fat lifts. If you don't feel the pop, you're either too shallow or you're cutting the leather. Do it again." She did it again. She felt the pop. He grunted. She stayed. 2 days later, a rim trader came through the yard with news that 6 Sunval blades had gone missing on a scout run and that Vaga's son had put a bounty out on any human tanner between the ash flats and the boneyard. The bounty was open. The bounty was large. Whittle listened to this, nodded, paid the man for a coil of sinew, and walked back into the shed. Skarn watched him go. The next day, he taught her how the belt roll worked. He showed her the pouches for the tungsten spikes. He showed her the loop for the fleshing knife. He showed her the sleeve on the inside of the apron where you could hide a shock cell if you needed one. She watched him lay it all out and understood for the first time that a tanner's apron was also a soldier's harness. Everything the tanner wore had 2 purposes. She had not noticed. She had thought it was clumsy design. It was not clumsy. It was very old design. "How long," she said, "have you been a tanner?" 41 years, he said. "How long have you been the other thing?" He looked up. His hands were on the pouches. He did not answer right away. 19, he said finally. "But that was a while ago. What was your unit?" He turned back to the belt. He did not smile. His voice went quiet in the way she was starting to recognize as the voice he used when he was telling the truth and did not particularly want to. "Second Expeditionary of the Terran Reach," he said. "Ordnance, armor. We answered the Silt massacre." He wound the belt around his fist and tied it off. "The rest," he said, "you don't need." She did not push. She would not push for another 2 weeks. When she finally did, it was because a spy came to the door. The spy came dressed as a hide broker. He had the credentials, he had the credit clip. He had the polite little chirps of clan-neutral trade dialect that a broker learned in his 2nd season. He was, Skarn understood the moment his shoulders came through the door, a member of the Phoric Intelligence Corps whose job was to identify humans of interest and cross-reference them against a Terran registry Faiga had bought from a fence in the outer ring. She knew because she had run intake for Vihaga for 11 years, and she had booked the interviews, and she had watched the Corps come and go through Vihaga's back hall. and this one had been in and out 3 times. His name was Vorush. He had a slight limp on the left side that came from a stab wound she remembered giving him herself in training when they were both 8. He did not know her. He looked at her like an unremarkable exiled cow. He did not know her, and the ease of that hit her like a slap. That was who she was now. To men she had once fed. Nothing, a blank in a doorway. She let the hurt burn once through her chest, and then she pocketed it. He came in and he sat down at Whittle's table, and he made polite noises about the hide market, and he asked Whittle about his provenance, and he asked him where he had come from. He asked him if he had ever served. He asked him if he had ever been to the serrated belt. He asked him if the name Kessler meant anything to him. And Whittle, without looking up from his tea, said, "David Kessler was my sergeant. He died in the silt. Get out of my house." Vorush stood up. He was fast for a fork. He was not fast enough for the old human at his own table. Whittle came out of the chair with a piece of wire and had it around Vorush's neck before the spy's hands had moved 6 inches. He walked Vorush across the front room by the neck, and he put him against the wall, and he pinned him there with a knee, and he said in cold and correct Vorak, "You will read me the file you were sent to confirm, all of it. Then you will walk out of this shack alive, and you will go home, and you will tell Varga son I said hello, or you will die here in your broker's boots, and Skarn will use your hide for a chair." Skarn watched from the doorway. Vorush was not a fool. He had a pocket slate. He took it out. He read from a Forak intelligence file, which had been cross-referenced against a Terran service registry, which had been fenced by a data broker on the 9th ring. He read a name Whittle had not gone by in 19 years. He read a rank. He read an assignment. He read a list. Whittle, Samuel J. Vorush read, 59 Standard, born Duluth adjacent, Terra, Cold Belt Township now under ice, enlisted at 16, Terran Reach, 2nd Expeditionary, Ordnance and Armor Specialist, deployed to Silt Sector following the massacre. Kill confirmed on 32 Kroghari raiders from the raid that burned Colony Silt 9. Discharged, honorable at 35. Registered as Tanner on Geltra system at 40. Note, subject is listed by 3 separate Kroghari clans as a priority 1 blood debt. Vorush swallowed. He read the next line and his voice thinned. Note, tokens name subject's kill record includes the entire command structure of the raiding party excepting 3 named Kroghari, all of whom are listed as missing in action. Subject is presumed to be tracking these 3. Do not engage. Whittle did not move. Skarn watched his face. It did not change. His face never changed. But she saw his eyes go a shade darker for 1 second, and she understood all at once what the tally marks on the underside of the knife were for. Not kills, kept ones, debts. He had killed 32 of the 35 who had burned his sister's colony. 3 were still breathing. He had come to the rim 41 years ago, and he had built a shack, and he had scraped hides, and he had kept the count under his knife where he could look at it every day. He had been waiting. Vorush stopped reading. Whittle took the pocket slate out of his hand and put it in his own pocket, and he let go of Vorush's neck, and he stepped back. "Get out," Whittle said. "Tell your matriarch I know she has the 3. Vorush blinked. "How?" he said. "Did you know she has the 3? "Because," Whittle said, "she sent you. Vierga only cares about a human tanner on the rim if her 3 personal blades have started sleeping badly." Vorush went. He did not limp on the way out. Skarn saw him choose not to. Whittle sat back down at the table. His tea was cold. He drank it anyway. Skarn sat down opposite him. She looked at the tally under the knife she had learned to hold. She looked at the man across the table. "You have been waiting 40 years, she said, "for 3 Kroktari to be together in one place." "Yes, ma'am, and Verga has them." "Verga bought them," Whittle said, "about 12 years back. She keeps them as her personal blades. Kroktari make good private muscle for a matriarch who has enemies inside her own clan. They don't care about Vorak politics. They only kill who they're pointed at. They will come for you now, she said. They will come for you, he corrected. I am incidental. Vierga wants you dead because you did not have the decency to die when told. She has to do it because if she does not, other exiled widows will start refusing to die when told, and then there will be exiled widows walking around her territory in numbers, and matriarchs who let that happen do not remain matriarchs. Skarn's hands closed on the tabletop. So she will send more, she said. She will send everything she has that is not her 3, Whittle said. The 3 she keeps for the throne pit. That is where she means to end this. She wants the count of matriarchs in the balconies. She wants an audience. She has already sent word to the other clans, I promise you. Then we should run. No, said Whittle, and he set his teacup down carefully. We should not. Why? He looked at her. His eyes were very tired. His shoulders had been long past sore since he was 22. Because, he said, the 3 are together in one place, and that will not happen again in my lifetime. She understood then what she had walked into on his stoop. She had walked into the last chapter of a book that had been open for 40 years, and by the accident of a wire in her hip, she was now in it. The second attack came 4 days later. They did not send 6 blades this time, they sent 30. They came in free squads under free lieutenants, and they came at first light, and they came with 2 war drones the size of horses that walked on 4 legs and hummed with plasma batteries at the shoulder. Whittle heard them from a mile away. He came into the loft and shook Skarn awake and said, without preamble, "Get the wire and the spikes. We are going to the tannery." The tannery was the drying shed and the pits behind the shack. 10 lime slurry vats, 12 tannin bark vats, a system of overhead beams for the hides, and 1 large curing oven where he cast his tungsten. Whittle had been building it or rebuilding it or improving it for 41 years. Skarn had thought it was a tannery. That morning she learned it was a killing ground. He had wired every gate. He had grounded every metal post. He had rigged the overhead beams so that a hide could be dropped on a man's head with a jerk of a rope. He had laid a strip of plate steel under the mud at the entrance to each vat, and he had wired it to a shock cell so that a Vahorak crossing the mud with metal boots would jolt hard enough to lose a stride. He had put trip wires. He had put fall lines. He had left the drying shed door open so that they would come in through it, and he had lined the inside of the drying shed door with a strip of magnetized tannin mud that would foul a shimmer shield. He had, 41 years ago, come to the rim to be a tanner. And he had also, 41 years ago, come to the rim to build this. "Take the beam," he said, and he handed her the beam. "Cover the pits. If one of them gets in the yard, you have permission to drop him. If 2 of them get in the yard, do not try. Come back to me, I will handle 2. "Where will you be?" she said. He nodded toward the curing oven. "There, alone. They will come to me," he said. "That is what today is for. Do not be a hero, ma'am. I have been building this shed since before you were born, and I do not need you in a hurry." Then he walked away from her with the fleshing knife in his belt and the belt roll of spikes at his hip, and no armor, and no shield, and no weapon that a Forak would recognize as one. They came in the front gate. The first war drone tripped the ground wire in the yard, and the ground wire did not stop it, because it was a war drone and it had a shielded chassis, but the ground wire routed around and closed the second circuit, and the second circuit dropped the overhead crossbeam, and the overhead crossbeam had a cloth hide the size of a wagon nailed to it. The hide fell on the war drone's shoulder mount. It did not crush the drone, it did not need to. It smothered the plasma battery. The battery, denied cooling, fried its own coils. Skarn watched the first drone go from the shed door and thought, in one flat sentence, that a war drone had just been killed by a wet hide. Then the blades came through the gate and she stopped thinking. She swung the beam. She was not good with it yet. She was strong. She was hurt. She was Forak, 7 feet of tusk and hide, and she had spent 42 winters on a hard moon, and she was in a killing rage she did not know she had until it came out of her chest like a rope. The first blade through the gate she took at the neck plate, the second she took at the knee, the third she took across the mouth, the fourth she missed, and he shot her in the shoulder, and she put the beam butt through his ribs and kept going. Behind her, in the yard, Sam Whittle was killing men. He killed the first 3 with spikes. She did not see it happen. She heard the whip of the throw, the crack of the spike into meat, the wet chuff of a body going down. 3 throws, 3 bodies. The remaining blades broke to the sides to flank the yard, and Whittle was gone by the time they got to where he had been standing, because he had walked calmly into the drying shed. The blades followed him in. They were told there was a human alone in the shed. There was a human alone in the shed. There was also a floor. The floor was made of pit boards. The pit boards were set to give underweight above a certain number of kilograms. Vorok in armor were above that number. The floor gave. 6 of them went into the lime slurry pit. Whittle stood on the beam that ran above the pit, and he watched them go, and he did not laugh because he had never in his life laughed at a man going into a slurry pit. He had done this before. He did not enjoy it. He simply understood that it was, of all the ways a Vorok might die, the fastest. Then the second war drone came in. The second war drone was smarter than the first. It scanned the shed, it saw the pit. It did not walk on the floor. It leaped onto the beam where Whittle was standing. It shattered the beam. Whittle fell, but he had already been falling because he had let go of the beam a half-second before the drone had made contact. He landed on the walkway, rolled, came up with a shock blade in his hand, and drove the shock blade up into the underside of the drone as it landed beside him. Shock blades were not designed to kill drones. They were designed to open Vorok throat plates. Whittle used the shock blade the way a butcher uses a boning knife, and he did not aim for the armor. He aimed for the coolant line under the shoulder. The coolant line vented. The drone caught fire from the inside. He was out of the shed and back in the yard before the drone finished dying. He was bleeding from a gash across the temple where a piece of the beam had caught him. He wiped the blood out of his eye with the back of his wrist and kept moving. Skarn watched him from the mouth of the shed. He was moving like a man who had done exactly this shape of morning, in exactly this shape of yard many times, and had lost once and had never forgotten what he had lost. He was moving like a man who had built this yard against a specific enemy and had waited 41 years to use it. The rest of the raid did not last long. 23 Vorok came into the yard. 6 went into the slurry. 4 went down to spikes. 3 went down to the beam. 2 ran and were dropped in the back. 8 stopped fighting when they saw the drying shed door. Whittle let those 8 go. He walked over to Skarn, who was leaning on her beam, and he checked the shoulder wound with 2 fingers, and he grunted. "Superficial," he said. "Sit down." She sat down. He pulled a folded cloth from his apron and pressed it to the wound. His hand was steady. His face was gray. He was 59, and he had just fought 23 blades and 2 war drones, and he had not eaten breakfast. "They will send," she said, "everything now." "They will send," he agreed, "everything now." "When?" He looked at the sky. He was thinking. 3 days, he said. "Long enough for Vihaja to call in the private moon. She will not fight us on the rim anymore. She wants an audience. She wants the pit." "How do you know?" "Because," Whittle said, "I have been reading the same book she has for 41 years. She has to end this in front of the matriarchs. Otherwise the matriarchs will decide for her." He stood up, slowly, holding the wall. "Sit," he said. "I need to talk to you about something. Then I need to sit down myself. Then we are going to eat, because I have not eaten today, and I am too old to fight on an empty stomach twice." He talked to her about physics. She had asked once how a tungsten spike beat a shimmer shield, because she had watched him beat a shimmer shield 6 times now, and she still did not understand it. He answered her the way he answered everything, as though she were a girl standing next to a fleshing post and he was showing her the angle. "A shimmer shield," he said, sitting at his kitchen table with his gray hair loose around his shoulders and a cup of tea in his hand, "is a field that dumps energy. It grounds plasma. It grounds coherent light. It grounds sonics. It does one thing very well, and it does that thing at the cost of a lot of battery, and it does that thing on the assumption that everyone who is trying to kill you is trying to kill you with energy. Do you follow? Yes, Forak weapons, he said, are all energy. Krokhari weapons are all energy. Every serious species out here fights with energy, because energy is what a civilized war is. You send photons at your enemy. He sends photons back. The shield takes the photons. Everybody goes home eventually. Energy is efficient. Energy is refined. Energy is the mark of a species that has stopped fighting with rocks. He set the cup down. Terra, he said, never stopped fighting with rocks. We got to space with rocks in our pockets. We got here with rocks in our pockets. I have a rock in my pocket right now. Do you know why? She said nothing. Because a shield, he said, does not know what to do with a rock. A tungsten spike is a rock. It is a very expensive rock, but it is a rock. It has no charge. It has no coherence. It has no waveform. It has mass and velocity, and mass and velocity is how my ancestors killed each other for 100,000 years before they figured out fire. A shield keyed to dump energy will look at a piece of tungsten flying at it at 40 meters per second, and the shield will register nothing, because tungsten is not what the shield was built to see. The tungsten goes through the shield does not know. And then the tungsten goes into the throat of the man standing behind the shield, and the man dies, and he dies confused because he was inside a shield when he died. He picked up the tea again. That, he said, is one half of it. The other half is my legs, your legs. Terra is a heavy world, he said. 1.5 gravities compared to most rim moons. The bones I grew up on are dense. The muscles that pull the bones are dense. The tendons that pull the muscles are dense. Do you know how much I weigh in local gravity? No. About what you weigh in your gravity, he said, which is not that much for a Forak, but my mass, at my gravity, my bones and my grip and my leverage are still what they were when I grew up. My skeleton did not get lighter when I moved. I am, for a human, ordinary. For a rim-worlder, I am a bear. I do not fight fast. I do not fight elegantly. I fight by putting my weight where a Forak does not think weight can go. I have 190 pounds of iron country muscle on a frame built for 1.5 gravities, and I know where every plate seam on your species is because I have been finding seams in hides for 41 years. Armor, he said, is just another skin. He drank the tea. She sat very still. We are not invincible, ma'am, he said. That is the thing they never understand about us. We bleed, we break, we die. We die easy some days. What we are is stubborn. We just make the other man die a little faster. Give us a rock and a reason, and we will outlast a shimmer shield. He set the cup down again. You asked. She had not asked, but she had. He was right. Later, she asked him about his sister. He did not tell her the whole thing. He told her a piece. He told her the piece about the winter. I grew up, he said, in a rail town outside what used to be Duluth, on the north edge of the cold belt. It froze for 8 months of the year. We had wood for 4. The rest of the year we cut the trees that the wind pushed down, and we split them, and we banked them against the wall of the house. My father was a tanner. My mother had died when I was 4. My sister was 3 years younger than me. Her name was Ray. She was the smart one. She read every book in the town library twice by the time she was 10. She got a scholarship to the orbital, and she went out and she took a colony job. Silt 9, rim mining outfit. She was on Silt 9 when the Krokhari came. He paused. They burned the colony for the ore stores, he said. It was that stupid. They killed 914 people for 11 tons of raw platinum. My sister was the shift lead. She got most of them into a lockdown before she went out to hold the door. She held the door for 11 minutes. That is a long time to hold a door against Krokhari. She was 28. I was 31. I was already in the 2nd Expeditionary. My Sergeant Kessler was the one who told me. He came to my bunk and sat down on the floor and told me. He did not stand. He did not make me stand. He sat on the floor. That was the kind of man he was. He stopped. There were 35 of them, he said. The raiders. I got 32. 3 ran. 19 years, and 3 ran. He put his hand flat on the table. They are downstairs, he said, in Varga's private moon, in a throne pit lined with the skulls of exiled widows, and one of them is called Grath, and one is called Velshai, and one is called Oskrath. They are her private blades. They do not know I am the one who is coming. They do not remember the door on Silt 9 because they were not the ones who held it. I have not forgotten. I do not intend to forget. He looked up. That is why I stayed on the rim, ma'am. That is why I built a tannery. That is why I built a tannery here, on this particular moon, 3 jumps out from Vaha Sun's court. I have been waiting for one of the 3 to make a mistake, and I have been building a killing ground while I waited, and I have been keeping my grip. Vgaga bought them 12 years ago and put them in her throne pit, and she has been feeding them and sharpening them and using them on her exiles, and I have been counting hides. Skarn thought about that for a long time. Sam Whittle, she said finally. Yes, ma'am. You did not open the door for me, she said. You opened the door for the 3. He was quiet. I opened the door for a tired woman, he said. The 3 came with the door. That is what the universe does. It sends the people it sends. Which was, she realized, the most human thing he had said yet. She did not know whether to hit him or thank him. She did neither. She refilled his tea. Varga Sun's demand came the next morning. It came on a formal disc, hand-delivered by a herald with a white sash. The herald was not attacked. Whittle read the disc at the door, nodded once, thanked the herald in Farak, and closed the door. Well, he said. Well, said Skarn, she has invited us to the pit. When? Tonight? On what terms? Trial by open combat. Her 3 against me. If I win, she frees you and pays passage for you to any world I name. If I lose, she takes both our heads and displays them on the balcony of the pit. And I trust her. You do not trust her. You do not have to trust her. You have to bring 9 witnesses who do. Skarn stared at him. 9 matriarchs of 9 clans, Whittle said. The full council. If Vaga breaks the terms of open combat in front of the full council, then any of the 9 can take her clan. She will not risk that. Not for the 2 of us. Not with her 3 watching. She wants the show, ma'am. That is why she chose the pit. She wants the Empire watching when her 3 take the human's head. How do you know she will invite all 9? Because she has already, Whittle said. She invited them yesterday. It is why she waited to send the disc. How do you know? Because Vorush told me, he said. When he was against my wall, Skarn thought about the tanner and the wall and the wire and understood, for the first time, that the polite little conversation with Vorush had been an interrogation. That night she watched him prepare. He did not put on armor. He did not have armor. He had a leather apron with pouches sewn into it, and a fleshing knife on his belt, and a roll of tungsten spikes at his hip, and a length of the blackwood beam cut down to arm's length. He had a small object in his pocket that he did not show her. He had a canteen. He had a spare cloth for his eyes. He had his hair tied back at the base of his neck, the way she had first seen it. He had his boots. He had, she realized, the same kit he wore to work every day. That is all, she said. That is all, he said. You are going into a throne pit against 3 Krogtari with a tanner's apron. Ma'am, he said, and his voice was almost kind. I have been going into rooms with a tanner's apron for 41 years. I am not going to change my apron for the Krogtari. He looked at her. You are not coming into the pit, he said. You are coming to the balcony. You will stand behind the 9th matriarch. You will keep your beam on the balcony rail. If Varga breaks the terms, you drop her from behind, from the balcony, before her guard can react. That is the only thing I need from you tonight. Everything else is mine. She looked at him for a long time. Sam Whittle, she said. Yes, if you die in that pit. Yes, I will kill Varga myself, she said, and I will hang her hide on your fleshing post. That is what I will do. Do not misunderstand me. I will not go home. I will not sail to a new world on your credit. I will kill her, and I will burn the pit, and I will scatter the skulls of the widows, and I will find the 3 surviving Croctari if they have somehow lived through this night, and I will kill them slowly with your beam. Do you understand me? Do you understand what I will do?" He looked at her. "I understand you, ma'am," he said. "Thank you." That was all. The pit was on a moon called Kvalthra, private property of the Sunval matriarchy, half a day's flight from the rim. The pit itself was a stone amphitheater, sunk into a black basalt caldera, its floor 100 paces across, its walls 20 meters high, ringed with 2 tiers of stone balconies. The lower tier was for the clan blades of Sunval. The upper tier was for the matriarchs of the invited clans. Whittle counted the balconies as he walked in. 9. Every matriarch of every major Varak clan sat on that upper tier, in her black robes and her tusk braid, watching. Behind each matriarch stood 1 bodyguard. Behind the 8th matriarch stood a woman in exile grey with a beam across her shoulders. Nobody looked at Skarn twice. She did not exist. She had counted on that. Vaga's son stood on the floor of the pit. She was old. She was enormous. She was 12 feet at the shoulder in her ceremonial armor, and her tusks were capped in worked iron, and her eyes were the color of hot tar. She had a personal guard of 8 blades behind her, and she had, on her left and right and left again, the 3. Skarn saw them for the first time. Grath was the largest. He was Croctari, which meant he was not Varak, which meant he was of the raider species, chitin-plated, mantis-jawed, with 4 arms and a low, forward-hunched carriage. He carried 2 shock blades. He looked bored. Velshai was smaller and paler, faster built, a knife fighter. She wore a shimmer shield generator at her hip. Oskrath was the last. He was the one who had held the second door on Silt 9, though Skan did not know that yet. He was the one Whittle had been looking for the longest. They did not know Whittle. Whittle walked into the pit alone. His hair was tied back. He wore his apron. He carried his beam. He did not look at the balconies. He looked at the 3. Vaga smiled. Her tusks were the size of a Vorak arm. "Old man," she said, in Vorak, so the balconies could hear, "you have come to die in a pit. I honor this. I have opened the pit for you. I have called the 9. I have brought my 3. You have brought a stick. I invite you to run. If you run before the first blade is drawn, we will send you home." Whittle looked at her. He looked at the 3. He looked briefly at the balconies, and he found Skarn, and he nodded once. Then he looked back at Vaga. He spoke Varak. He spoke it low and clean. "Vaga, son," he said, "I did not come for you. Step aside. Let me have my 3. That is all I want. Step aside, and I will not touch you." The balconies rippled. This was not the script. This was not the show. Vaga had brought the human to be broken, and the human had told the matriarch of matriarchs to step aside. Vaga's smile did not falter, but Skan saw the muscle at her jaw contract. "You're 3, said Vaga. "You're 3. "They burned my sister," said Whittle. "I have been counting hides for 41 years, and I am owed 3. Varga laughed. She turned to her guard, and she pointed at Whittle, and she said in Old Vorak, the way she gave commands, "Kill him slowly." The 3 came off the wall. Grath first, 2 shock blades. Coming low and forward with the mantis shuffle, Whittle set the beam, and he set it high, and he set it slantwise across the yard, and he waited. Grath reached him. Grath swung. The shock blades came down at Whittle's collarbone. Whittle stepped inside the swing. He did not step back. He did not step aside. He stepped inside. He put his body against the Croctari's chitin plate, close enough that neither shock blade could reach him, and he brought the butt of the beam up under Grath's chin. Croctari chins were plated. They were not plated on the inside. Whittle brought the beam up hard enough to shatter the mandible. Grath staggered. Whittle did not stop. He turned inside Grath, drew the fleshing knife from his belt with his left hand, and drove the fleshing knife into the soft joint between the 3rd and 4th arm plate. The blade went through the chitin because Whittle knew where the seam was, because the shape of a Croctari arm joint had not changed in 19 years, and neither had Whittle's hand. Grath went down. The balconies did not speak. They were leaning forward. Velshai came next. She keyed her shimmer shield. She came fast, in a knife-fighter's arc, from Whittle's left. Whittle turned toward her and let the beam fall to the mud, and he pulled a spike from his belt roll and he threw it. The shimmer shield did nothing. Tungsten went through it and through her collarbone and out the back of her chest plate. She stopped mid-stride. She looked briefly confused. She had been inside a shield when she died. Oskrath was already moving. He was the one who had held the second door. He knew now, in that moment, who Whittle was, because he had spent 19 years being told that a human named Whittle would come, and here Whittle was, and it was not a story anymore. He was fast, he was very fast. He carried a pole arm with a curved blade at each end, and he swept it toward Whittle in a two-handed cut that would have taken most men in half. Whittle did not have the beam anymore. Whittle had the fleshing knife and the belt roll. Whittle went low. He went under the sweep, and he went under it because he had spent 41 years going under the swing of a cloth's foreleg to scrape the belly hide of a six-legged brute, and a cloth swung wider and faster than any Kroktari, and Whittle's back was not what it had been at 30, but his knees still knew how to go where they went at 30. He went low. He came up inside the pole arm's arc. He drove the fleshing knife up under Oskrath's throat plate. He did not saw. He pushed straight up through the soft palate into the brain case. Oskrath's eyes went out. His forearms went slack. The pole arm fell. Whittle pulled the knife back out. He stood up. He was bleeding. Skarn had not seen the wound yet, because Velsai had, at the last instant, gotten her knife into Whittle's ribs on her way past. Not deep, but not shallow. Blood was coming through the apron. He was pale. He was leaning slightly. The balconies were silent. The lower tier was silent. Every clan blade of Sunval on the lower balcony was silent. The three were dead. It had taken, from the first step of Grath to the fall of the polearm, about 11 seconds. Vagasun stared. Whittle looked up at her. He walked slowly toward her. Her personal guard closed around her. 8 blades, they set. They lowered lances. They raised shimmer shields. Whittle stopped at the edge of the guard. Vagasun, he said, in Varak, and his voice carried up to the 9th matriarch on the balcony because a throne pit was built to carry a voice. I told you, step aside. I did not come for you. Your 3 are down. I am owed. I am paid. Let me walk out. Viga was, for one heartbeat, going to let him walk out. Then she looked up at the balconies, and she saw the 9 matriarchs looking down at her, and she understood that if she let the human walk out of her pit on her moon in front of her 9, she would be finished before dawn. Because a matriarch who lets a human tanner kill her 3 and then walk out is a matriarch whose stock has just become an exile's meal. Vanga made her choice. Kill him, she said. The guard moved. Whittle threw the spike. He was not aiming at the guard. The guard could take a spike, and there were 8 of them, and he did not have 8 throws in him with the wound in his ribs. He aimed at Vanga, straight through the guard line, straight through the shimmer shield of the closest blade, into her jaw. The tungsten spike took Viharga-san under the iron-capped tusk on the left side and buried itself in her jaw and drove up into the roof of her mouth, and the matriarch of matriarchs went down onto her knees in front of her own guard, in her own pit, in front of the 9. The guard hesitated. That was all Skarn needed. She had been on the balcony behind the 8th matriarch. She had a beam. She dropped the beam over the balcony rail. It fell 20 meters. It hit the shoulder of Viharga's captain of guard, and it broke him. She followed the beam, hand over hand, down the pillar, and she landed in the mud beside Whittle, and she picked up the beam, and she set it across Tvyadji's throat, and she looked up at the 9th matriarch on the highest balcony, and she said the 4 words of the old challenge tongue that every clan widow of the Verak was taught before she was ever allowed to breed. Ugval Kran San, which meant, the widow claims the clan. The 9th matriarch stood up. The other 8 matriarchs stood up. By the ancient law of the pit, which had been read to the nine before the fight and which Varga had insisted upon because she had assumed she would be the one enforcing it, the widow of Sanval, if she had the strength to take the clan and the witnesses to name the taking, had the right to do so. And Varga's guard, if they moved against her now, would be moving against 9 matriarchs at once on the balcony with their bodyguards behind them and their private clans behind that. Varga's guard did not move. Skarn drove the beam through Varga's throat. Then the pit was quiet. Whittle sat down in the mud because his legs had gone. Skarn came to him. She knelt beside him. She looked at the wound in his ribs and she put her hand over it and she pressed. His hand, when it came up to cover hers, was cold. "You are hurt," she said. "Yes, ma'am." "You will not die in this pit," she said. "That is not permitted." He tried to laugh. It came out as a cough with blood in it. He nodded. "No, ma'am," he said. "That is not permitted." She lifted him. She was 7 feet of tusk and hide, and he was 190 pounds of iron country muscle on a frame built for 1.5 gravities, and she carried him out of the pit like a child. The 9th matriarch descended from the highest balcony and met them at the pit gate. She had not spoken during the fight. She spoke now. "Skarnavesh of Clan Sanval," she said. "The council of 9 witnesses your claim. The clan is yours, your first act." Skarn looked at Whittle in her arms. His eyes were half closed. His hair had come loose from the tie. He was pale as bone. "My first act," she said, "is that this human is not to be touched by any Vihorak of any clan for the rest of his life. Any Vihorak who touches him will answer to Sanval, and Sanval will answer to the 9. "Witnessed," said the 9th matriarch. "My second act," said Skarn, "is that this human is to be given a hot bath, a real cup of coffee, and passage to any world he names. My clan's coin, my clan's ship. He does not lick boots, he does not owe." "Witnessed." "My third act," said Skarn, "is to sit down because my hands are shaking." The 9th matriarch bowed. It was a small bow, but 9 matriarchs did not bow to widows. 9 matriarchs bowed to matriarchs. That bow was, itself, the last piece. Skarn carried the old human out of the pit. Behind her, the 8 remaining matriarchs of the 8 other clans stood on their balconies in silence, and they watched and they understood what a small tanner on the rim had done to their politics with 3 tungsten spikes and a wet hide, and they filed the understanding away, each in her own way, for use later. They stitched him up in a clean room 3 floors above the pit. The medic was Forak. She was gentle. She used a needle that was thinner than his fleshing needle. She closed the rib wound in 14 small stitches, and she cauterized the smaller cuts, and she bandaged the temple. She gave him something clear to drink that took the color back into his face. Then she left. Skarn sat by the bed. He slept for a day. When he woke, she gave him a cup of coffee. It was not a very good cup of coffee, because a coffee bean was a hard thing to find on a Forak moon, and the roast was uneven, but it was hot, and it was black, and she had brewed it herself in a copper pot with a scrap of paper as a filter. He held it in both hands and drank. "Ma'am," he said, "that is a real cup of coffee. Thank you." She watched him drink. "Sam Whittle," she said. "Yes. You did not know I would be behind the 8th matriarch. I hoped. You did not know she would not stop me. I hoped. You did not know Verga's guard would freeze." "They always freeze," he said, "when the matriarch on the floor is on her knees. It has been 800 years since a matriarch was on her knees in her own pit. There is no drill. There is no training. They freeze. Verga forgot that. Verga always forgot that empires are drills, and drills do not cover the case where the matriarch is on her knees. I did not forget." Skarn thought about this. "You planned all of it," she said. "I planned some of it. I hoped for the rest. You knew I would not go home." He drank the coffee. He set the cup on the little table by the bed. "Ma'am," he said, "I knew a tired Vorak widow on my stoop for 2 weeks. I knew she cleaned my knives without being asked. I knew she stopped crying in her sleep after 4 nights. I knew she picked up the beam without being told twice. I knew she cut my hide better than most apprentices by the 2nd day. I did not think you would go home. I thought you might. I did not think it. I offered because a man ought to offer." She nodded. "I will not go home," she said. "No, ma'am. I have," she said, "just become a matriarch." "Yes, ma'am. I am not sure I am equipped." "You are," he said. "You have been running Farga's back hall for 11 years. You know every clan book. You know every kill count. You know where every widow is buried. You are more equipped than Farga was. Farga inherited. You took. Taking teaches you things inheriting does not." She sat quietly. "Sam Whittle," she said. "Yes, I want you to stay." He looked at her. His eyes were very tired. His shoulders had been long past sore since he was 22. "Ma'am," he said, "with respect, no." "Why?" "Because," he said, "I am 59, and I have finished the book that was open on my shelf, and I would like to close it. I would like to go back to my tannery. I would like to scrape hides. I would like to teach a girl I have not met yet how to hold a fleshing knife. I would like to die in my own bed. Not," he added, "for a while yet, but when I do." "You will not advise a matriarch." "I will not advise a matriarch." "You are not," she said, very grand. "No, ma'am." She looked at him for a long moment. Then she stood up, and she picked up the empty coffee cup, and she went to the door, and she stopped. "Sam Whittle." "Yes?" "If a tired human ever comes to my door," she said, "I will give her salt broth. That is what I will do. And I will pull the wire out of her hip, and I will teach her the beam. That is what I will do." He nodded. "Yes, ma'am," he said, "that is the right thing to do." She went out. He went home 2 days later on a Sunval courier ship. The passage was, in fact, on Sunval coin. He accepted it because Skarn had made it a matter of clan honor, and he was too tired to argue. He was set down at the edge of his own yard, 3 jumps out, and 1 week later. The tannin mud was where he had left it. The beam was where he had left it. The gate post still had a scorch mark from the second raid. The magnet wire was ringing very softly in the wind. He picked up the fleshing knife off the beam. He turned it over. He looked at the tally marks under the wooden handle. He counted them out loud, alone in his own yard. 32. He took a needle from his apron. He set the point against the wood. He scratched 3 more marks. 4 vertical, 1 across, was 5. 3 more, added carefully, made 35. He looked at them. He did not smile. He did not cry. He was 59, and he had a rib wound that was going to ache in the cold for the rest of his life, and he had a hide on the beam that needed scraping, and he had, in the wind, the ringing of a magnet wire that meant nobody was in his yard. He closed the knife. He set it back on the beam. He picked up the fleshing knife by its handle, and he set the flat to the hide, and he began to scrape. The pop came easily. It had been coming easily for 41 years. It came easier now. Somewhere 3 jumps out, on a private moon, a Forak matriarch who had once been an exile with a wire in her hip sat on a stone throne that had until recently belonged to Viga-san, and she read a clan book, and she made a small notation in the margin. The notation read, "The widow claims the door." It was, in Vohorak, an old idiom that meant nobody would be turned away. She read it to the 9th matriarch 3 days later, and the 9th matriarch, who was old and had seen many bad things and few good ones, put a hand on her shoulder and said, "Good, that is a start." And on the rim, in a tannery built 41 years ago by a man who had come to the rim to wait for 3 names, the old human scraped a clat hide by the last light of day, and the door of his shack stayed open, because the wind was warm and the sky was clean, and there was nobody in his yard who did not belong there. What a story that was! What a piece of stubborn, quiet, tired courage! The real strength in this life is not the fist that never breaks. It is the fist that breaks and heals and closes again around the same tool the next morning. That is the true weapon of the human animal. If this story moved you, drop it a like, because that is what keeps stories like this one on the air. Share it with the person you know who loves science fiction about the human who stands against the impossible. Subscribe and turn on the bell so you do not miss the next epic tale of the small, stubborn people of Earth against the vastness of the dark. And tell me down in the comments, because I want to know, Would you have hired old Sam Whittle to train the guard of a brand new matriarch, or would you have taken his passage home and let him scrape hides until the last light of his last day? Stay close to the ones who open the door for the tired. Keep looking at the stars.